It was the kind of job people don't talk about at family dinners, the kind that makes conversations stall when you mention it. When I told my sister I'd taken a night shift position at the Burnham and Sons crematorium, she looked at me as if I'd announced I was joining a death cult. "Are you okay, Nate?" she asked, and I smiled because it was easier than explaining the truth that I wasn't okay, that I needed quiet, solitude, and something to keep my mind off everything I had lost. The job offered all three. The ad had been short, clinical, night technician needed, training provided, discretion essential. It paid decently, had no customer contact, and promised long hours of uninterrupted silence. That's all I wanted. Silence. Nothingness. I started on a Monday. The building sat at the edge of the industrial district, where the warehouses gave way to woods that never seemed to dry. Even in daylight, the air carried a scent of ash and wet bark, and at night, when the mist rolled in from the pines, the crematorium looked like it had grown there, like something ancient made of concrete and smoke, squatting beside the forest with no intention of ever leaving. The first nights were instructional. I shadowed a man named August who had been there for years, but spoke as though every word cost him something. He showed me the furnace operation, how to load the gurney, how to check the paperwork. "Always verify the tag," he said more than once, referring to the metal identification disc that comes with each body. "It's the only thing that stays after the fire." I thought he meant it as a joke. Later, I understood he wasn't joking. August moved like a man born among fire, slow, deliberate, with a heat-worn gaze that drifted off when the furnace roared too loud. The control room was lined with old dials and newer screens, a Frankenstein mix of analog and digital that should have been updated a decade ago, but wasn't. The chamber doors opened with a sigh and locked with a hiss. The heat hit you even through layers of protective gear dry, thick and absolute. Inside, the flames were so hot they shimmered like liquid, and once the body entered, there was no reversing it. It was oddly clean, surgical even. You expected horror, gore, some kind of grotesque theater, but the process was more like a mechanical dissolution. The flesh vanished, the bones calcined, and what remained was swept into an urn as powder, sterile and nameless. I could handle that. What I couldn't handle was the silence that followed, because after the last shift body was gone, after the furnace doors were closed and the ashes set to cool, you were left alone in a building designed to handle death but not to comfort the living. And that's when the weight of it pressed in the silence after fire, thick as wool. August left on my 5th night, claiming a family emergency, and I was promoted to full shift technician without warning. The manager, a woman I'd never seen in person named Miss Halberg, sent me a text. "You're trained enough. You'll do fine. Remember protocol. Doors stay locked." That was all. No pep talk, no checklist. Just doors stay locked. I remember that line more than anything else. It was in the second week, during my first completely solo night, that I began noticing the gaps, the inconsistencies. You only catch when you're alone long enough with the same space. There was a side corridor near Furnace 3 that was never mentioned in the schematics August showed me. A hallway that curved slightly and ended in a steel door with no label, no lock, and no purpose I could identify. The first time I saw it, I assumed I'd missed something during training, that maybe it was storage or a maintenance shaft. But when I asked in our nightly report log, I got no response. No answer, just silence. The hallway had no lights. You had to use the handheld torch to see anything beyond the first few feet. The air there was different too, not hotter or colder, but denser somehow, thicker than the rest of the facility. The walls were bare concrete, and the floor sloped downward by just a degree or two, imperceptible until you noticed your steps growing heavier. I walked that corridor twice. Once during the lull between cremations, when I had 20 minutes alone and the fire's hunger had quieted. I stopped at the steel door, knocked out of habit. There was no answer, no vibration, no sound. But when I pressed my ear to the metal, I heard something I couldn't explain, not movement or voices, but pressure, like a vacuum filling itself. like breath held just beneath the threshold of hearing. I told myself it was the building settling. I left it alone. Nights passed. The routine hardened into something like comfort. Bodies came in, old men, accident victims, cancer patients, the forgotten and the nameless, and they were processed, reduced, collected, and delivered. I signed off on forms, logged identification numbers, and loaded the dead with mechanical efficiency. I stopped thinking of them as people. That's the first thing this job does. It strips the names off memories and turns them into forms, weights, temperatures. A 78-year-old male, 58 kilos, 1800 degrees, 90 minutes. That's all. And yet, somewhere in the rhythm of incineration, I began to notice ... patterns. The furnace readings showed minor discrepancies, temperatures that spiked without input, sudden fluctuations that didn't match the body weight or moisture content. Small things. At first, then more. The ashtrays began returning fragments that shouldn't exist, bone densities inconsistent with human remains, discolorations that didn't match any biological standard. One night, a cremation of an elderly woman yielded not just bone, but what looked like a metal shard fused with ivory, a piece the size of a coin, smooth and inscribed with lines too fine to be cracks. I filed it away, logged it as metal anomaly, and boxed it per protocol. I didn't sleep that morning. I stayed at the break room table, holding the box, feeling its weight, knowing that it didn't belong to anything dead, or if it did, it belonged to something that had never lived the way we understand life. On the next night, I inspected every body more carefully. I checked the paperwork, the tags, the forms. Nothing was wrong, and yet I felt a presence growing in the routine, like the fire itself was watching me, weighing my reactions. Sometimes, when I turned away from the viewing port, I had the distinct feeling that someone was standing behind me. Not malevolent, not angry, just ... there. Watching, waiting. August never came back. His number was disconnected. I emailed Miss Halberg twice. No reply. The third time, I asked directly, "What's behind the door near Furnace 3? Her answer came in 3 words. "Do not enter." No greeting, no punctuation. Just that. So I didn't. Not that week. Not until the night the furnace opened on its own. I didn't sleep that day. I lay on the futon in my 1-bedroom apartment, with the blackout curtains drawn and the sound of the city muffled by layers of insulation I'd installed myself. I'd grown used to silence, or at least I thought I had, but that morning was different. The silence felt alert. It was as if the world outside had stepped back, holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I kept the box with the metal shard beside me, unopened. I hadn't even cleaned it. The ashes still clung to its surface, embedded in the lines that looked like inscriptions. Not letters, not symbols, just grooves too symmetrical to be random. I told myself it was an artifact from a prosthetic implant, maybe some oddity from a surgical plate or experimental orthopedic device, but that was a lie I couldn't make myself believe. I'd seen titanium melts under that furnace. I'd seen metal liquefy, shatter, disappear. That piece should not have survived. When I returned to the crematorium, the first thing I did was check the maintenance logs. The system showed nothing unusual. No overrides, no errors. No recorded activity in the furnace room beyond the standard thermal cycle I had manually initiated. And yet I knew the furnace had opened on its own. It had been closed. I had double-checked the seal, but when I returned from the restroom barely 2 minutes away, the door was slightly ajar. The internal temperature had dropped by 100 degrees, and the ashes that had begun to cool were scattered on the floor as if blown out by an exhalation. The cameras were off. That, more than anything, unnerved me. The entire facility was monitored through a security system that looped every 12 hours. I checked the playback 3 times, but the footage from that window was corrupted 10 full minutes of static, cut cleanly and without warning, as though the system had blinked. One submitted a formal report to Miss Halberg that night. detailing the technical malfunction and attaching the corrupted footage. Her response arrived an hour later. One line, understood. Keep the door closed. Which door? I didn't mention the door. I hadn't written a word about it. I stared at the email for a full minute, rereading that single sentence until it blurred. Keep the door closed. The one behind Furnace 3. That door. The one that had no lock, no hinge, no record in the facility blueprints. I checked again, opened the archive schematics in the office computer, and traced every corridor, every maintenance room, every shaft and panel. The hallway wasn't there. The building ended 40 feet earlier, according to the plans, and yet I had walked it. I knew its slope. I knew the sound of my boots on its cold, granular concrete. I knew the feeling it gave me when I reached the end and stood before the unmarked steel. That night, I didn't touch the furnace. There were no bodies scheduled, no deliveries, and no staff visits. It was a ghost shift, what we called downtime windows, when the schedule was light enough to restock supplies or deep clean the urn room. I used that time differently. I took the box with the metal shard and a thermal scanner, then walked down the corridor behind Furnace 3. The air thickened with every step. I can't describe it in ordinary terms. It wasn't a smell or a temperature shift. It was more like stepping into a pressure pocket, like entering a room where something vast had just left, a weight that still remembered its own shape. When I reached the steel door, I held the scanner to its surface. The reading came back warm, not hot, not industrial, just warm, like skin, like breath. There were no vents nearby, no exposed ducts or heat lines in that section. The door should have been cold. I touched it with my hand. It felt like touching something alive, not wet or soft, but reactive, as if beneath the metal there was motion, a pulse, almost. I withdrew quickly, more disturbed by my own lack of hesitation than by the sensation itself. I should have left it alone. I should have locked the corridor, deleted the footage, told myself it was stress. But something was drawing me in, and it wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. That's what terrified me. I wasn't wondering what was behind the door. I was remembering. I went back to the control room and pulled up the logs. I combed through 4 years of entries, looking for anomalies. 2 deaths had occurred on site in the last decade. 1 heart attack in the break room in 2012, and 1 technician who went missing in 2017. No body was ever recovered. His name was Alan Yu. His file was sparse. No known relatives. His final shift log was cut off mid-sentence. All units functioning. Temperatures nominal. Noticed fluctuation near. That was it. No follow-up. The file was marked closed. I tried searching the external system for more, but the credentials were outdated. When I checked the physical logbooks, his signature was the last one in the register for October 18, 2017. The following page was torn out. I copied his ID badge number, then did something I hadn't done before. I ran his tag through the cremation registry. Every employee who dies on site is, by policy, cremated on site unless next of kin claims the remains. Alan Yu's tag number had no cremation record. I returned to the corridor just before 3 a.m. The hallway felt different that time. Not heavier, but quieter, as if the air was waiting. I placed my palm on the door again and leaned close. No sound, no warmth. But the metal was vibrating softly, like a tuning fork buried in stone. I don't know what made me do it. I reached into my pocket and took out the shard. As I lifted it toward the door, it grew warm distinctly, noticeably warm, as though responding to proximity. The vibration increased. A resonance, not loud, but deep. The groove patterns on the shard seemed to shimmer faintly, as if reflecting light that wasn't there. I placed it against the door, and the metal accepted it. There was no mechanical latch, no click, no sound at all. It simply sank in less than a centimeter before stopping. The vibration stopped, and the door opened. It didn't swing or slide. It receded inward silently, and what emerged was not another room, not a tunnel. It was nothing. A darkness without shape or depth, a blackness that looked like it had mass, like it was folded inward upon itself. I stepped back. The air that poured out was not hot or cold, it was alien. It didn't smell like anything I'd known. It had weight, presence, and it shimmered slightly as it moved across the floor like mist sliding uphill. I wanted to run. My hands trembled, but I couldn't move, not out of fear, but out of certainty. I had seen this before, not in dreams, not in visions. I had no memory of when or how, but my bones knew it, the way animals know to flee fire. I reached for the shard again, but it was gone. The door closed, no sound. Just the same inward slide. It was over in seconds, but it changed everything. The hallway felt colder. The walls no longer sloped. The scanner showed normal readings. And when I returned to the control room, the clock was off by 13 minutes. Not forward, back. I reported none of it. I wrote in the log that all systems were nominal. But I knew better now. The crematorium was not just a place for the dead. It was a gate, or maybe a scar. And behind that door was not death. It was something older, something patient. Something that had waited for a long, long time to be remembered. The day after the door opened, I told myself I would act normal. I would follow the standard checklist, process the intake forms, check the furnace temperature, wear the gloves, sweep the ashes, label the urns, record the tag numbers. That was the plan. Pretend it hadn't happened. Pretend I hadn't watched the laws of matter bend like steam around a pressure valve. Pretend I hadn't felt the presence of something conscious beyond that threshold. It almost worked. For 3 days, nothing happened. The corridor behind Furnace 3 was exactly as it had been when I first walked it unlit, silent, ordinary in its unnaturalness. The door remained sealed. I checked every night, as if daring it to open again. It never did. But what changed was the fire. Not its color, not its heat, but what it left behind. The first body that week was a woman in her 80s. Heart failure. Her name was Florence Beller. She had no family listed, no religious objections noted, no medical implants declared. A textbook case. She weighed 54 kilos, and her paperwork was immaculate. She arrived at 9:47 p.m. I logged her intake, confirmed the tag, and began the cremation at 10:03. The furnace had reached operating temperature, 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, and the process was scheduled to last 92 minutes. Standard. I sat in the control room with the timer running. The fire roared steady behind the reinforced glass, casting its familiar orange glow across the metal walls. I tried not to look too long. There's something about watching a body combust that wears down whatever distance professionalism gives you. Flesh curls inward like paper. Limbs draw up in reflexes the dead are not supposed to have. Ribs collapse in seconds. But it's clean, clinical. That's what I used to believe. When the cycle ended, I opened the chamber and let the remains cool. What emerged was not textbook. There were the usual fragments: pelvis, femur shards, skull base, but among them was something else, something unrecognizable. It was pale gray, about the size of a child's fist, dense and irregular, with a surface texture that shimmered faintly, as if coated in dusted mica. I picked it up with tongs and felt a resistance I wasn't used to. This thing was heavier than it should have been, far too heavy for bone. I turned it over. There were no inscriptions, no markings, no indication that it was artificial, but it was wrong. The surface was not burned. It was clean, no charring, no soot. It looked untouched by fire. I ran it under the UV lamp. It refracted light strangely, splitting the beam into patterns instead of color. The center glowed faintly, like something alive beneath the surface was responding to the exposure. I placed it in a sealed evidence bag and labeled it Remains, Anomalous, Florence Beller. I marked the form in red and filed it in the secure drawer in the back of the admin room. I didn't know what else to do. We're told not to question anomalies. We're told to file, log, and escalate if necessary. But there's no escalation procedure for this. No one to call it midnight when cremation leaves behind something inorganic that behaves like it remembers being alive. That night, as I swept the ashes, the tray sparked. Just once. A tiny, audible static pop. It startled me, and when I looked again, a small black fleck about the size of a fingernail was glowing faintly at the bottom of the basin. I lifted it with tweezers, and the glow stopped instantly. The room returned to stillness. I held my breath. I took the fragment and placed it beside the earlier object in the drawer, locking it with the key that no one but I ever used. I slept less than 2 hours that morning. My dreams were of ash that whispered, of shapes moving behind flames, of a door that pulsed when no one touched it. The next night, I cremated a man named Jeremy Kwan, mid-40s, brain aneurysm, death certificate clean, no implants, no anomalies. His paperwork was filed by a sister who lived out of state. She declined collection of the ashes. I began the process at 11:12 p.m. I watched the flames do what they always did. The body collapsed. Heat curled bone into chalk. The furnace timer beeped after 96 minutes. When I opened the chamber, the air was wrong, not in temperature, but in scent. There was no odor of char, no carbon tallow. Instead, the air smelled faintly metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. That shouldn't have happened. The chamber filters are industrial grade. Nothing should escape. I swept the remains and found, once again, something that did not belong. This time, it was a ring. Not gold, not silver, not titanium. It was dark gray, seamless, with no markings on the surface and no sign of heat damage. But what chilled me was that the paperwork explicitly stated the man was not wearing jewelry. We remove all adornments during intake. He arrived in a hospital bag. A video log showed me confirming it, and yet the ring was there. I put it on the table, turned off the lights, and waited. After 20 minutes, it began to hum, barely audible, like a low drone just at the edge of perception. The table vibrated. I picked it up and threw it back into the drawer with the others. My hand trembled. I locked the drawer again. That made 3 items, 3 impossible things. I didn't know what they were, but I knew where they were coming from. I began logging the anomalies in a separate notebook I kept hidden in my locker, not digitally, not on paper tied to the system, just ink and silence. Each item, each body, each detail. I noticed a pattern. Every anomaly occurred during the late night cycle between midnight and 3 a.m., and every one of those cremations had something unusual in the intake path, a glitch in the tag system, a name that didn't match previous registries, or, in 2 cases, no family or records at all, like they had been inserted into the schedule by a hand I couldn't see. And each anomaly occurred within 48 hours of my walking that corridor, of touching the door. By the end of the week, there were 5 items in the drawer: a coin, a bone that wasn't bone, a ring, a shard of opaque crystal, and a smooth black disc no bigger than a contact lens. Each behaved differently. Each had a presence, a weight, not measurable by scale, but by instinct. They felt like pieces of a puzzle designed to disassemble you instead of being solved. On the 7th night, I received a delivery marked priority intake. The body was labeled as unclaimed. No name, just Jane Doe 46B. No paperwork, no cause of death. The delivery was signed by someone I'd never heard of. When I called the number on the transfer form, it rang once and disconnected. I almost refused it. Almost, but protocol demands process. I moved her into chamber 2 and began the cycle. I watched the fire take her. There was no movement, no twitch, just the sound of ignition and the settling collapse of heat-dried skin and bone. I tried to look away, but this time I saw something move inside the flames. It was small, subtle, a shift in the fire shape, a flicker against the back wall. I leaned closer. It wasn't a shadow. It was a silhouette, a figure standing inside the fire, motionless, watching, no features, just form. The fire didn't consume it. It moved with it, wrapped around it like light obeying a different gravity. I stumbled backward and hit the control switch. The fire shut off. The chamber began to cool. The silhouette vanished. I didn't dream that. I remember every second. I ran to the camera feed and scrubbed the footage. Nothing. Corrupted. Again. Another blacked out file. My hands shook. I opened the chamber when the temperature allowed. The ashes were normal, but at the center, perfectly balanced on the steel grate, was an eye, not an organ. A sphere, milky white, slightly larger than a marble, with a black center that shimmered faintly. I reached for it with the tongs. It blinked. I dropped it. It rolled off the tray and hit the floor with a soft click. I stared at it for a full minute. It never moved again. I picked it up. It was cold, hard, dead, but I had seen it blink. I placed it with the others. 6, and that's when I started hearing the voice, again behind the door. The human mind doesn't unravel all at once. It folds, neatly, quietly, in small, deliberate turns like paper being creased, like memory being tucked into a drawer you never meant to open. That's how it started. Not with screaming, not with fear, with folds. The night I heard the voice, I was more tired than afraid. Not physically. My body was used to the rhythm of night shifts by then, but mentally, I was unraveling in those slow, invisible ways. Sleep came in fragments. Food was an afterthought. I stopped responding to texts. I didn't call my sister back. I started leaving the lights off in the break room, in the locker area, even in the corridor outside the main chamber. The darkness wasn't comforting, but it felt honest. It matched what I carried inside, what I had seen. By the time that night came, what I now think of as the first real night alone, I had accepted a quiet truth. I wasn't just working in a crematorium anymore. I was living inside a threshold, between fire and silence, between process and memory, between this world and something older that refused to name itself. The shift was quiet, too quiet, not in the romantic sense, not peaceful, just empty, dead. No scheduled cremations, no deliveries, no appointments, just me, the furnaces, and the things in the drawer. I checked the drawer at the beginning of the shift, like I always did. 6 items, all in sealed containers. They hadn't moved, not physically, but I began to feel something else. A weight, not psychological, not metaphorical. A literal pressure in the room, like standing too close to an old television, still humming with static even after being turned off. A silent frequency that made your bones tighten. That was new. I walked the facility in silence. I turned off all unnecessary machines, even the ambient speaker in the urn room. I wanted to hear everything, not because I was paranoid, because I was listening for something specific, a rhythm, a pattern. It had begun the night before, a sequence of clicks and hums in the ventilation system I had mistaken for mechanical. But now I recognized something beneath it, speech, distant, garbled, as if someone were whispering through a filter not designed for language. I stood beside Furnace 3 for nearly 40 minutes, eyes fixed on the inspection window, the furnace itself, cold and still. I turned off the safety lights and closed the chamber door, sealing myself in darkness. That was when I heard it again, not a whisper, but a sequence. A sound too structured to be random. It started as a low murmur, like breath against glass, then rose slightly in pitch, forming syllables. Not English, not anything human, but not meaningless either. It followed a cadence, 3 short tones, a pause, 1 long tone, then silence, then again. The sound came from inside the furnace, not the speaker, not the walls, from the fire chamber itself. But the furnace was cold, powered down, disconnected from the active grid. That, more than anything, frightened me. I stepped back and closed the hatch, but the sound didn't stop. It continued, steady, indifferent whether I listened. I turned on the master switch to break the silence with the ambient fan system. The sound ceased immediately. I stood frozen, hand on the switch, lungs held tight. Then I did what I hadn't done in weeks. I turned on the PA recorder. I wired it to the chamber mic, bypassing the internal recording system, and set it to analog tape. No digital glitches, no corrupted files, no excuses. I left it running. I moved to the control room and waited. At 2:47 a.m., the furnace turned itself on. No one touched the controls. No command input. No heat signature requested. The panel lit up. The internal sensors activated. Temperature readings began to climb. Slowly at first, minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit, 600 degrees Fahrenheit, then faster. I ran to the chamber, opened the observation hatch. The furnace was full of fire. Full. A blaze I didn't initiate. White, clean, controlled. Not chaotic. It roared with purpose. Inside it, I saw nothing, no forms, no shadows, but I felt something watching, not from the fire, from behind it, as if the fire were a veil, and something on the other side was now aware of me. And then it spoke. I use the word spoke because I don't have another. It wasn't speech as we understand it. It was pressure in the chest, vibration in the teeth, the distinct sense that words were being pushed into me from the inside out. I staggered back and heard not with ears, but with memory, a single phrase. You kept it. 3 words, simple, delivered with no emotion, no accent, no intent. But the implication hollowed me. I knew instantly what it referred to. The things in the drawer. The 6 impossible remains. I had kept them, preserved them, and it had noticed. The furnace blazed higher. I ran to the control panel, but the kill switch was unresponsive. All controls were locked. The fire rose beyond safe limits minus 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit, 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. At 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit, the structural integrity of the furnace shell would begin to fail. The metal would warp. At 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, the refractory lining would crack. The system didn't care. The fire was not governed by code anymore. I backed away, clutching the emergency shutdown key. It didn't respond either. The entire interface was frozen. Just readings. No input. That's when the alarm started. Not the fire alarms. The internal alarm. The one meant to indicate containment breach. I'd only heard it once during training. A high-pitched rising tone that meant a seal had been broken. But there was no breach. No one had entered. I was alone. That's what I thought, until I turned and saw the silhouette by the hallway to Furnace 3. It wasn't a man. Not exactly. It had the height of a man, the general outline, but it flickered slightly at the edges, like bad reception. The outline was wrong. Shoulders too wide, head too narrow. It didn't walk. It waited, watching me, or listening. I couldn't tell. I couldn't move. I didn't even breathe. Then it turned slowly, deliberately, and stepped into the corridor. Toward the unmarked steel door, the alarm stopped. The furnace shut down. The chamber lights flickered and died. The temperature readings dropped instantly, not gradually. One moment they were at 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit. The next, 0. No heat, no residual. The system rebooted. All lights returned. The corridor was empty. I ran to the steel door. It was still closed. No markings, no seams. Cold to the touch. I opened the control logs. No activity recorded. According to the system, the furnace had never ignited. I rushed to the recorder. The tape had stopped. I rewound it. Nothing. Silence. Clean static. As if the entire building had never made a sound. I returned to the drawer. One item was missing. The black disc. Gone. No sign of forced entry. No fingerprints, but mine. No logs. Just absence. And on the wall above the drawer, etched lightly into the paint, were 3 short marks and 1 long line. The same pattern I had heard in the whispering static. 3, then 1. That was the first night the fire spoke to me. Not with words, with memory. And from that night on I knew I was no longer the one observing. I was being observed, and the door was waking up. The next morning I sat in the break room, long after the sun had risen, the kind of dull, gray light that seemed to avoid entering the crematorium entirely, as if nature itself respected the invisible boundary that clung to the place like soot. I hadn't written the incident in the shift log. I couldn't. What would I even say? That the furnace ignited itself and burned hotter than its own steel shell was rated to withstand? That a figure of flickering geometry walked past me into a hallway that didn't exist on blueprints? That a piece of something not made in any human factory had vanished from a drawer that no one should have known existed? Even in the isolation of my thoughts, I struggled to form sentences that didn't unravel halfway through. My mind knew it had happened, but the act of writing it down made it seem like fiction, like I was reducing something vast and terrible into lines of ink and grammar. The notebook I kept for anomalies remained unopened in my lap. My hands trembled. I tried coffee. It tasted like melted plastic. I spat it out and went to the sink. That's when I heard the door to the administration office close. Not slam, not creak, just close. Precisely, efficiently, as though someone had measured the distance in advance. I hadn't seen anyone enter. I checked the employee schedule. There were no others on shift for another 6 hours. No maintenance, no deliveries, no appointments. But the admin office light was on. I walked to the edge of the hallway and stood just before the turn. I don't know how long I waited, listening for footsteps, voices, any sound that might reassure me I wasn't about to walk into another fracture in my reality. Then the voice called from inside flat, deliberate, unmistakably human. "You can come in, Nathaniel." I froze. No one called me that, not even in the official records. Everyone used Nate. Only my mother had called me Nathaniel, and she had been dead for years. I stepped into the office. It was cleaner than I remembered. There was a single desk, polished and empty, except for one folder and a thin tablet device I hadn't seen before. Sitting behind the desk was a man I had never met, but I recognized his posture, his uniform, black tie, pale gray shirt with the Burnham and Sons insignia above the breast pocket. Nameplate read A. Wilcox. He looked at me with the kind of expression reserved for uncooperative machinery tolerance mixed with inevitability. He didn't offer me a seat. He simply gestured toward the folder. "Your notes," he said. "You've kept them hidden, but the building records regardless." I opened the folder and saw my own handwriting scanned and printed in clean digital type. Every entry from my private notebook was there, each anomaly, each timestamp, each description. I hadn't shared those notes with anyone, hadn't photographed them, hadn't uploaded them, but here they were, dated, indexed, annotated. How? I asked. He tilted his head slightly, as though puzzled by the question itself. "This facility is old, but it sees." I thought of the cameras, the vents, a grid of black dots in the ceiling that I had assumed were sensors for air quality or temperature. I never questioned what they saw or what they remembered. He continued, "You've crossed a threshold that cannot be undone. You've seen what we buried. You've heard it speak." "I didn't tell anyone," I said. "I haven't shown anyone. I don't even know what it is." He leaned forward. "And you want to know, don't you?" I didn't answer. He took my silence as consent. "There are layers to this place," he said. "Burnham and Sons has existed in some form or another since 1893. Back then, it wasn't a crematorium. It was a foundry. Before that, it was a quarry. Before that, it was a hill covered in oak trees that the indigenous people refused to climb. We don't know why. We've searched their records, their oral traditions. The name they gave it translates roughly to the mouth that exhales memory. Sound familiar?" I sat down, not because I wanted to, but because I felt the blood drain from my legs. He continued, "In 1946, after the war, the property was acquired by a private research consortium under the guise of geological surveying. Their real interest was what they found beneath the basalt layer structures that couldn't be explained by tectonic activity. Geometric cavities. Material samples. One of those samples matched what you found in the furnace tray 3 nights ago. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. "You're not the first to see it," he said. "You're not even the 10th. But you are the first in nearly 12 years to survive a direct interaction with the door." "So what is it?" I asked. "A machine? A life form? A prison?" He hesitated. "We don't know. We only know what it does. It reveals itself only through fire. That much we've learned. The crematorium wasn't built here by accident. The furnaces feed it. The ash, something about the way memory burns into calcium and vapor, makes it active. We don't understand the mechanism, only the pattern. And the anomalies?" I asked. "Leftovers," he said. "Gifts, debris, or maybe bait." My stomach turned. I stood up. "I'm leaving. I'm done." He didn't stop me. He simply nodded and said, "The drawer will not be empty tomorrow. You know that. The fire won't let you go until it has decided you've finished listening." I left the office without another word. I went to the locker room, but when I reached for my keys, they weren't there. My wallet was missing too. So was my phone. I searched every pocket. Empty. I ran back to the break room. Nothing. The cameras showed no footage of me entering or exiting the facility that day. The logs had no record of my shift beginning. I hadn't just lost objects. I had lost continuity. I was no longer working at the crematorium. I was part of it. That night, the furnace ignited again. No body. No schedule. Just fire. And this time, the voice said nothing. But the flames moved in patterns I had seen before. On the inside of my own eyelids, the flame didn't stop burning that night. It should have. After each cycle, the system initiates a cool-down protocol. Airflow increases, heating coils shut off, and temperature slowly drops below 150 degrees before the system returns to standby. But this time, the furnace in Chamber 2 remained lit long after protocol expired, as if something beneath the control board refused to release it, as if the fire itself had been hijacked by a will that didn't answer to circuit boards or gas lines or even gravity. I sat in the control room, watching the display flatline at 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit for over 3 hours with no material inside the chamber. No body, no bone, nothing, only a brightness that shimmered like a held breath, refusing to exhale. I tried to override the system manually, but every command returned the same error code: access denied, unauthorized source present. That phrasing chilled me. It didn't say malfunction. It said unauthorized source. That meant the system thought someone else was operating it, someone without credentials, someone not logged in, someone who didn't exist inside our infrastructure. I removed my badge from the reader and scanned it again. No effect. I typed in my manual PIN. Rejected. I switched terminals. Same message. The system had locked me out of a building I was supposedly running alone. I stared at the flame through the observation glass and did something I hadn't dared before. I activated the old security camera in the corner of the furnace room. It was analog, disconnected from the main network, its feed recorded to a standalone DVR unit that no one had used in years. The newer cameras had replaced it, all tied to the central server, which, of course, conveniently lost or corrupted every relevant file since the door first opened. But this one, this analog system, was immune. It didn't upload. It didn't sync. It simply recorded, silently, onto magnetic tape. I dusted the unit off, turned the knobs, adjusted the vertical hold. The picture emerged slowly grainy, washed out, black and white, but functional. The furnace chamber glowed white-hot at the center of the frame, and in that frame, at 2:11 a.m., something moved. Not a flicker, not a reflection. A silhouette, human-shaped, upright, standing directly in front of the furnace with arms at its sides, head tilted slightly as if in contemplation. The figure didn't glow. It absorbed light. It stood like a hole in the fire, like a shadow cast in reverse. The camera picked up no facial features, just absence. It didn't move for 47 seconds. Then, without warning, It turned its head, not toward the furnace, toward the camera, toward me. My chest locked. The image shook briefly. The feed crackled. The figure stepped forward once, then again, and stopped a foot from the lens. It shouldn't have been possible. The camera was mounted 5 feet up, behind the safety glass, angled down across the chamber. No one could stand in front of it without breaching the inner room. But there it was, occupying the screen, staring into the lens, into me. I hit pause. The image froze. The silhouette was perfectly centered. I printed the frame. The printer protested. It hadn't been used in years, but eventually spat out the page. Black and white, grainy, but clear. The shape was real, physical, present. I held it in my hands like a death sentence. I had proof, but proof changes nothing. I scanned the photo with my phone, tried to upload it, share it, but each time I opened the file, it was blank, not corrupted blank. The same happened with copies. I emailed it to myself. The attachment disappeared. I posted it to a hidden folder online. The thumbnail showed a white square. The image refused to propagate. It was like the photo had a mind of its own, like it chose not to exist outside the building. I returned to the drawer. Still 5 items. The disc remained gone. But now, something else had changed. The inner lining of the drawer, the soft, fire-resistant padding, was marked. Not scratched, branded. A symbol had been etched into it from the inside out, as though heat had burned its shape into the surface. 3 concentric circles, interwoven by vertical bars that intersected at asymmetrical angles. Not a language. Not art. Geometry with purpose. Something meant to encode, not express. I took a pencil and traced the outline, then placed it next to the printed photo on the breakroom table. The photo now showed only the furnace. The figure was gone, but in its place, exactly where it had stood, was a faint distortion. A blur, as though the air itself remembered something that film had been forbidden to keep. I brought the paper to my face and breathed on it, just heat and moisture. But slowly, the image re-emerged, not the figure itself, but its impression. Like old paper revealing lemon ink under candlelight. I blinked, pulled back. The image faded again. I began experimenting. Light, temperature, motion. With each change in condition, the photo behaved differently. It was not static. It was reactive. A photograph of a moment that refused to stay still. I wrote all this down in the anomaly log, but with each new note, the sense of pressure in the room increased. The walls seemed to pulse subtly, as if the building was breathing. Not fast, not panicked, just aware. I could no longer pretend this place was merely a workplace. It was a witness. I brought the photo to the admin office the next night, hoping Wilcox would be there again. But the office was dark. The chair was empty. The folder gone. The nameplate on the desk now read closed for maintenance. A joke, maybe, or a warning. I called the number Halberg had used. Disconnected. I searched employee records for Wilcox. Nothing. No record, no badge number, no HR file. As if he had burned away, too. I returned to the camera feed and reviewed the last 6 hours. Everything looked normal. Until 3:22 a.m., the tape glitched. A single frame of static, then impossibly another figure. Not the same as before. Smaller, stooped, facing the furnace. And in its left hand, something bright, metallic. The image lasted only 2 frames, then vanished. I printed it, compared it to the original. The outline matched the silhouette I had seen in the observation corridor on the night the door opened, the night I lost time. I checked the date on the system. It was 1 day before I started working there, before I was hired, before I even applied. I searched back further, hour by hour, day by day. The tape had glitched every week at 3:22 a.m. for at least 2 years. Always the same figure, always holding the same object, always alone in the fire. I locked the tapes in a box beneath my locker. I told myself I would destroy them, burn them if I had to. But every time I held a match, my hand shook. Something inside me wanted to know more. Not just curiosity. Something worse. A need. As if the fire had reached inside and planted a root. And now I was only feeding it. That morning, when I left the crematorium, the sun had already risen. The sky was flat and blue. But on the back wall of the building, freshly scorched into the brick, was the same symbol I had traced from the drawer. Concentric circles, vertical bars, and something new beneath it, something that hadn't been there the night before. A word, written in letters I had never seen. But somehow I understood it. Return. I told myself I wouldn't go back in. I repeated it like a mantra. I wrote it down, scribbled it into the margins of my shift logs, texted it to myself in the middle of the night. Do not return. Do not look back. Let it close. But the fire doesn't forget. Not when it's tasted memory. Not when it has marked you. And certainly not when you've seen its face in the gaps between the flames. The week passed in fragments. I took time off first one night, then another. The crematorium didn't protest. No calls from Halberg. No emails. No schedule updates. I thought I was being cut loose. Then, on the third day, a package arrived at my door. No return address. No courier. Just a small box wrapped in thick brown paper and sealed with a strip of black wax. Pressed with a symbol I knew too well, concentric rings intersected by vertical bars. I froze in my hallway, hands hovering inches above the package, not sure if touching it would be acknowledgement or surrender. Inside was a single item, a badge, Burnham and Sons, my name engraved cleanly on a brushed metal strip. But the badge was different from the one I had been issued. This one was heavier, warmer. Its reverse side was engraved with numbers I didn't recognize. A time, 3:22 a.m. a date. Tomorrow. I didn't sleep. I sat up staring at the badge, waiting for the sun to rise, then fall again. When midnight came, I was already outside the crematorium gates, parked in the farthest corner of the lot, engine off, window down. The building pulsed in the dark like a held breath. It was colder than usual. No wind, no insects, no sound at all. Even the forest behind it stood silent, as though the trees were listening. I entered without resistance. My badge, this new one, opened the main gate, deactivated the security lock, bypassed the entry log. No timestamp was recorded. I checked the control panel. All systems offline. No temperature readings, no cameras active. The place was asleep. I walked past Chamber 2, where the last voice had spoken, and stopped in front of Chamber 3. The door to the hallway behind it was slightly open. I hadn't left it like that. The air that poured from the corridor was warm. Not furnace warm, earth warm. The warmth of underground spaces, of deep stone, of something buried. I stepped inside. The light failed almost immediately. I used the flashlight on my phone. It lasted 4 steps before the screen flickered and died, the battery dropping from 78% to 0 in less than a second. Total blackout. I continued by memory and instinct. The slope of the floor was steeper than before. Each step felt more like descent. The air thickened with a scent that had no name, a blend of burnt resin, wet iron, and the sterile cold of something that shouldn't breathe. I reached the door. It was open. Not fully. Just enough to show the darkness behind it. A perfect vertical seam of black, darker than the corridor itself. I touched it with the edge of my palm. No heat, no vibration, just the same overwhelming sense that I was being seen. I stepped forward, just one step, then another. The threshold accepted me. No transition. One moment I was in the corridor, the next I wasn't. There was no room on the other side, no walls. No ceiling, just space, shifting, fluid. The ground beneath my feet was solid but unseen. I looked down and saw nothing. I looked up and saw movement. Light without source, pulsing in slow waves like breath across glass. Shapes swam above and beneath, some geometric, some organic, all impossible. The air carried whispers, not words, but intent, pressing into my thoughts with the gentleness of a knife being unsheathed. I couldn't run. My body didn't know how. It only knew to witness. Then something moved toward me. It didn't walk. It didn't fly. It approached by becoming nearer. A distortion in the light. A suggestion of limbs, but not symmetrical. It had the suggestion of a face neither kind nor cruel, but constructed entirely of absence, like a mask worn by fire. It hovered in front of me and stopped. Then a sound, not vocal, not external. A remembered sound, embedded directly into thought. Return. I shook my head. I didn't know what it wanted. I didn't understand. You are the witness. More forms rose in the distance, tall, angular, fluid. Each bore fragments of what I had seen in the anomalies. The shimmer of the black disk, the curve of the sphere, the markings from the branded drawer. I understood, in a way deeper than thought, that I had not found these things. I had been shown them. And now they were asking for something in return. The figure extended what might have been a hand. It held something, small, familiar. The disc. I reached out. The moment my fingers touched it, the air exploded in white, not light, just absence. Every thought, every sound, every emotion, every memory went silent. For one perfect second, there was only now, no past, no future, just presence. When sensation returned, I was on the floor of the break room. The lights were on. The clock read 4:06 a.m. My clothes smelled of ash. My palms were clean. The camera feeds were blank. The furnaces were cold. But in my hand, I still held the disc. Only now it had changed. Its surface was no longer smooth. It was etched with my name. And below it, witness, entry confirmed, seal accepted. The next morning, I received an email from Halberg. No greeting, no signature, just one sentence. You have been processed. I didn't go home. I sat in the crematorium parking lot for almost 9 hours, eyes fixed on the building's silhouette while the sun climbed its way through a sky that seemed less convincing than usual, like a theater backdrop, painted too clean, too blue, trying too hard to pretend the world hadn't changed. The disc was still in my hand. I didn't remember walking out with it. I didn't remember walking out at all. But there it was, black, warm, etched with my name, pulsing faintly whenever I closed my fist around it. I wrapped it in a cloth, placed it in the glove box, locked it, then threw the keys into the storm drain beside the lot. That should have been the end. But there's no end for the witness. Not after return. Not after confirmation. I drove to the nearest police station with no plan, no evidence they could accept, and a desperate need to say something before I lost even the ability to speak. The officer at the desk was young, bored, the kind who thinks strange people walking in during business hours are just looking for someone to talk to. I told him I worked night shift at Burnham & Sons, that there had been unauthorized access, potential equipment sabotage, dangerous anomalies in the furnace room, that I had proof that someone or something had altered the operation of the facility, that I had seen them, and that whatever was behind the sealed corridor needed to be investigated before someone else disappeared. I didn't say the word door. I didn't say witness. I didn't say return. But something in my tone must have unsettled him. He asked me to wait. I did. 10 minutes later, 2 plainclothes officers brought me into a side room. Not hostile, not friendly, just blank. They let me speak. I told them about the furnace activating on its own, about the anomalies I had logged, the items that shouldn't have survived combustion, the missing footage, the sealed corridor, the symbol that branded itself into the wall. I even showed them the printout from the analog camera feed, though the image had since faded into a pale gray smear. They nodded, took notes, asked no questions. When I finished, one of them, his badge read LTS. Hartwell folded his notebook and said, "Have you been under unusual stress lately?" I laughed. I didn't mean to. It came out sharp, bitter, like steam breaking through a hairline fracture. I told them I had names: Halberg, Wilcox, a list of bodies that returned impossible remains, system anomalies logged over multiple nights. I offered to bring them to the crematorium. They declined. Hartwell stood. Burnham is a privately contracted facility. We only investigate if a criminal report is filed by the company itself. I asked if I could file a report. He said no because no crime had occurred. No missing persons, no theft, no assault. You're clearly dealing with stress, Mr. Shaw. That place, it gets to people. You might consider time off. I can recommend someone. There's a counselor we work with familiar with grief-adjacent environments. I stared at him. Grief-adjacent? He smiled, polite and cold. Places where death is routine tend to pull things loose. I left without another word. They never asked for the location of the corridor, never requested a copy of the logs, never even took down my contact information. That night, I checked the crematorium logs remotely from my apartment. My credentials still worked. I wasn't removed from the system, but the records had changed. Every anomalous cremation I had logged now showed perfect results. Normal temperatures, normal times, normal ashes. The anomalies were gone, redacted, worse revised. Florence Beller's record now showed collected by family. Jeremy Kwan, referred for private cremation offsite. The Jane Doe, entry error, nobody received, all erased, all rewritten. Except for one thing, Alan Yu, his record remained blank. Still terminated mid-sentence, still no closure. I clung to that gap like a splinter in the fabric, the one thing they hadn't cleaned up, the one proof that I hadn't dreamed the whole thing. I dug deeper. I went back 10 years in the archives. 20. The crematorium had changed. Hands 3 times since 1958, each transition accompanied by facility upgrades, digital system overhauls, archival integrity resets, euphemisms for erasure. But scattered throughout the decades were anomalies buried in maintenance logs, system flags, private memos never intended for public review. In 1976, a technician named Margaret Elvin recorded magnetic disturbance in the combustion chamber. She filed a report. The response? Technician Elvin has been reassigned. Issue closed. In 1984, a photo technician filed a complaint. Recurring image patterns on soot-marked bricks behind furnace unit. Shapes appear to shift nightly. His follow-up log was blank. In 1991, a security contractor wrote, refused to complete patrol route through back corridor. Structure inconsistent with prior map. Door not found on blueprints. The report was stamped, resolved. I printed everything. Dozens of pages. Redacted lines. Revisions. Faint echoes of the same cycle discovery, silence, removal. I packaged it all into a file labeled Repeat Witness Reports, Burnham and Sons. I emailed it to myself, to my sister, to a burner account. Within 30 minutes, all 3 addresses returned an error. Message blocked by remote server. Attachment corrupted. I tried printing them. The printer jammed. 3 times. I tried photographing the pages with my phone. Each image turned out blank. Every method I used to carry the knowledge outside failed. But when I brought the documents back to the crematorium, the copier worked perfectly. Only inside the building could the evidence exist. I left the printed files inside the anomaly drawer. That night, I found a new note taped to my locker. It wasn't typed. It wasn't written. It was burned into the paper clean, elegant, unmistakable. The door does not close when ignored. It closes when accepted. Below that, the same symbol, only now surrounded by 10 small marks. One for each anomaly, each step, each confirmation. The fire doesn't just consume, it remembers. And now it remembers me. The crematorium no longer operated by time, not in the way clocks measure it. Days passed, but each shift blurred into the next. Like the soot gathering in corners no one cleaned anymore. I stopped checking calendars. My phone stopped syncing. My emails came back unread, unacknowledged, undeliverable. But the building remained constant, more constant than anything else in my life. It waited, and it watched. The note that had been burned into the paper, the door does not close when ignored. It closes when accepted, never left my mind. I read it over and over until I no longer remembered what my own handwriting looked like. I wasn't working anymore. I wasn't being paid. There were no schedules, no bodies, no other staff. And yet the front doors unlocked every evening when I arrived. The lights came on. The breakers held. The furnaces powered up. It was as if the building recognized me not as an employee, but as part of its internal anatomy, not a visitor, not an operator, a cell, a function. It was on one of these nameless nights that I stopped waiting for another anomaly and decided to search backward. Not the logs, they had been rewritten, purged, sabotaged. But there were records that predated the digital age, remnants sealed in cabinets that hadn't been opened in decades, some in file rooms hidden behind collapsing drywall and locked grates, others buried in boxes beneath the urn room, long forgotten beneath the shelving. I carried a flashlight and bolt cutters. Most locks broke easily. A few resisted. One refused to break at all until I touched it with the disc bearing my name. It clicked open like a magnetic key had been inserted, though no mechanism should have recognized it. Inside that particular locker was a single box, dated 1981. It was sealed in red tape. The label read, "Unprocessed, do not archive, P7." I carried it to the breakroom table and opened it slowly. Inside, paper files, brittle and yellowing. Several were handwritten. Others typed on carbon copy. No official letterheads. No signatures. Only identifiers. Urnum Project P7. Phase 2. Internal Exposure Reports. I read the first one. Technician Simatson. Dated March 17, 1981. Described exposure to non-reactive fire phenomena. Madsen wrote, witnessed flame behavior inconsistent with oxygen-fed combustion. Source of ignition was self-generating. Temperature surpassed instrument threshold. Remains showed absence of combustion bone fully intact, but inverted in mass. Weight measured minus 0.07 kilograms. System flagged result as error. Repeated 3 times. Same result. Ordered not to log further data. Was told to consider transfer. The next report came from L. Krell, dated July 4, 1981. Krell noted auditory hallucinations and displacement of internal clocks. After walking the corridor behind Chamber 3, claimed to hear something that remembered me. No medical follow-up was recorded. Final line, removed from shift rotation without explanation. File marked closed. But the most disturbing report came with photos. A grainy black and white series dated October 2, 1981, time-stamped 3:22 a.m. The first image showed the chamber door open, no technician present. Second image, flame inside, but no registered cremation scheduled. Third image, silhouette at the back of the furnace, arms lifted, head tilted. Fourth image, same silhouette stepping into the fire. Fifth image, chamber empty. All images marked internal use only. Scrawled across the top, do not duplicate, do not print, do not acknowledge. I flipped to the final page of the file and found a floor plan, not the current layout, but the original. It showed the furnace chamber, control room, break room, but behind chamber 3, the space was marked differently. No corridor, no wall, just a label, locus apertum, temporarily sealed. Beneath it, coordinates. I recognized them. They matched the burial permit for a plot behind the facility, filed in 1954, later erased from municipal records. The plot had never been used. The land was registered as city property, but remained fenced and unmarked. The shape of the lot mirrored the internal architecture of the corridor. I waited for morning. I couldn't go until the sun rose. Whatever waited out there in the dark, it respected old rhythms, light and silence, night and boundary. When dawn broke, I walked behind the building. The grass was overgrown, but something unnatural marked the soil, a rectangular seam of concrete, long covered by moss and dirt. I scraped it away with a trowel. Beneath the layer of earth, I found a hatch, steel, cold to the touch even in daylight. The same concentric circle symbol was faintly etched into its center. I returned that night. The hatch opened with the disc. The stairs beneath descended into earth that felt older than any structure around it, stone carved with unnatural precision, walls too smooth to have been laid by human hand. The air thickened with each step, not musty, but clean, almost sterile, as though time itself had not touched this place. At the bottom was a chamber, not large, but dense with pressure. A single object sat at the center, an urn, black stone, no markings. Its surface was warm, and around the urn, etched into the stone floor, the same phrase repeated over and over in spiraling lines. The fire is not hunger. IT is memory. The fire is not death. IT is return. The fire is not end. IT is witness. I tried to lift the urn. It didn't budge. I touched it, and my mind filled with images, flashes of faces consumed in flame, of figures stepping through invisible doors, of time folding and unfolding like breath. I saw Madsen, Krell, I saw Alan Yu, and then I saw myself, stepping into a furnace that shimmered like liquid glass, disappearing into heat that did not burn. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the crematorium. The clock read 3:22 a.m. The door behind Chamber 3 was open, and from within, the light pulsed again. I didn't walk to the door. I didn't run either. I simply found myself in front of it, as if time no longer required transitions. The corridor behind Chamber 3 was not how I remembered it. The walls had changed. They were no longer concrete, but smooth, seamless, and pale, like polished bone. There were no seams, no panels, no shadows, and yet the space was not dark. It glowed faintly from within itself, as though it remembered what light used to be, and was mimicking it out of muscle memory. The air was still not heavy, not cold, not humid. Still, like something holding its breath. The door at the end stood open, wide, welcoming. Inside, the fire no longer roared. It hummed. It did not flicker like flame. It pulsed like a heartbeat made of heat and memory. The chamber had changed too. No furnace walls. No observation glass. It was vast now, without boundary, like stepping into a cathedral built from the interior of a star. At its center, floating above a dais that hadn't been there before, was the urn from the burial chamber beneath the facility. But here, it was cracked open, releasing a thin thread of fire that curled upward in spirals, forming symbols in the air symbols I could now read, not because I'd studied them, but because they were mine. They told my story. They told all the stories. Every anomaly, every item, every name I had written in the log, every technician who had vanished, every whisper behind the flames. Every time someone stepped through that which was never built to be opened, all of it lived here, woven into the breath of the fire. I stepped forward, and it accepted me. There was no heat, no burning, no pain. The fire parted like silk, like curtains in a room I had lived in all my life, but had somehow forgotten. Inside the flame, there were voices clear now, no longer buried under distortion. They didn't speak English. They didn't speak at all. They transmitted, direct, total. The voice I had first heard, you kept it, returned. But now, I understood it wasn't accusing me. It was thanking me. I had preserved the memory. And now, I would become part of it. The items I had stored, the coin, the ring, the disc, the bone, the fragment. The blinking eye rows around me, each rotating in slow arcs, drawn toward the center of the chamber. One by one, they entered the urn and vanished. And with each one, I remembered something that had not been mine to remember. Lives, faces, entire histories scorched into ash, trapped in objects that refused to disintegrate. Not anomalies, not leftovers. They were souls, held intact by fire that had been designed to unmake everything but them. I looked down at my hands. They were glowing. My skin was becoming translucent, every vein illuminated from within by something brighter than light. The disc in my pocket had fused to my chest. There was no pain, only completion. I understood then that this was not a death. It was a transfer. The fire does not destroy. It collects. We call it cremation. But what we mean is translation. Every soul we burn is not reduced. It is rewritten. Not every person can be received, but those few who contain fractures in the shell of the world, are kept whole. They are remembered. And through them, the fire speaks back. I don't know how long I stood in the chamber. Minutes, hours, or maybe I never left. Maybe I was already here when I was born. Maybe all time flows in reverse once you step through the furnace. I remember returning to the break room. Or rather, I remember watching someone return. He looked like me, moved like me, but his eyes were hollow, not lifeless, but holding, containing something deeper, older. He opened the anomaly drawer and removed the files I had printed. He didn't read them. He burned them, not in the furnace, in his hand. The fire responded to him, and in that moment, I understood the final truth. The fire was not just a gate. It was a mind. And every witness, every technician, every body that passed through its chamber was not fuel. They were words. I was a sentence, and I had finally been spoken. Outside the crematorium, life continues. The city hums. The sky turns gray, then pink, then black again. Families collect urns. Administrators file reports. Bodies arrive. Ashes leave. No one questions the process. No one listens for the whispers between shifts. But beneath it all, the fire breathes, and the witnesses remain. I remain. My name is Nathaniel Shaw, or it was. Now it is just one note in the chorus that burns between silence and memory. The crematorium still stands. The furnaces still light. And behind Chamber 3, the corridor is still there, waiting, because someone someday will ignore the protocol. They will hear a whisper that does not belong to this world, and they will answer it, just like I did, just like we all do, eventually. Because the fire is not hunger. It is home, and it never forgets who it has spoken.